Hey, Annie. Can you hear
Hey
us?
guys.
Hello,
Yeah,
welcome to Lisbon.
I know. I wish I was hanging out and drinking margaritas with you guys.
Yeah. Well, there's just as much space between Laïla and I as there is between us, I think. So you're not that far away from us. Thank you guys for being here. I brought my iPad up here because I've heard from so many people that they're really excited about this panel to learn from you all. Culture and communication. We talk a lot about communication. We talk a lot about making remote work, and the detractors of remote work are very quick these days to jump on culture and cohesiveness as things you just simply can't do without an office, right? So I've been taking notes. I've heard from a lot of people in the audience already, and I know we've got a lot to get to. So we'll have about 10 or 15 minutes at the end to get to questions, so please make sure to submit those so we can ask our esteemed panelists here at the end. But I've got a few things jotted down that I want to get to. So let's kick this off with you, Annie. Just do a quick introduction. Of course, your name, title, but we're really interested in learning a little bit about Atlassian and your distribution and how your role specifically connects to culture at Atlassian.
Awesome. Great to see everyone. Wish I was there with you in person. I'm Annie Dean. I'm the head of Team Anywhere for Atlassian, and Atlassian is a collaboration software company. You might know us from Jira or Confluence. And Team Anywhere is our approach to distributed work, which means that our 10,000 employees choose where they work every single day. We do have offices around the globe in places like San Francisco, New York, Sydney. We're a company that's based in and was founded in Australia, Austin. But what's really exciting is that people get to choose where they work every single day, whether it's in the office, at home, or a combination of the two. More than 40% of our employees live more than 2 hours from an office. So we have plenty of people that are formerly quote unquote remote. And my role, oversees our workplaces, oversees our transformation to distributed work. And what's particularly relevant for this conversation is I oversee what we call our intentional togetherness program, which is the idea that we bring people together in person in offices to really connect up to 4 times a year. And I'm actually in the middle of one right now with my leadership team. So after this, I'll be running to the New York office to see my team who's in from Australia. So looking forward to the conversation today.
It's a good excuse not to be here with us. Thanks, Eddie. Laïla, could you do the same, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Laïla von Alvensleben, head of new ways of working at Mural. Mural is an online whiteboard. I'm sure that you've all heard of it. I have some teammates over there. So previously, as head of culture and collaboration, I was very involved with really creating the foundations of Mural's culture with all the other Muralistas. That's what we call our employees at Mural. Coming up with our values together with the founders, putting those values into action, coming up with best practices on how to work together, remote work playbooks, how to gather together, how to connect, and really create our culture from there. So I've just facilitating the culture with a lot of other culture carriers at Mural, and had a lot to do with the growth of Mural over the past year. So that's me.
Thank you. Darren?
Awesome. Thanks all for being here. I'm Darren. I'm the VP of Workplace Design and Remote Experience at Andela. Andela is a talent platform that connects brilliance with opportunity. And my role in joining the company is to create a shared reality, to create the architecture on which a company can work remotely. So Andela has no offices, 350 or so people around the world. And prior to joining Andela, I spent 3.5 years at GitLab, scaling their remote operations as well. And so I'm excited to be amongst the besties, as Danny mentioned. Let's get into it.
Awesome. Let's keep this one with you, Darren, because I'm very intrigued to hear your thoughts on this. So when people saw the title of this panel discussion, they saw the word culture, and I think the mind initially goes to how we connect on a very personal level, maybe sort of outside the context of work. But I think all of us up here would agree that work is actually what unites us. Our culture is actually built by what we do together, how we onboard, how we collaborate, how we hire, fire. All those things are what actually are the building blocks of our culture, and then we sprinkle in some other things around that. So I'm curious to hear how you approach this aspect of culture in your work at Andela or elsewhere, and what you've seen observing other teams.
Yeah, I'll go down two routes here. The first is that it's really important to define what culture is at your organization. It's actually different at different organizations, depending on the industry that you're in and the size of the company that you're in. But I'll start by focusing on the how. Too many companies don't realize that how you work together is massively impactful on the culture. And that starts with process, which leads to documentation, which then leads to the other things we more typically think about on culture, like how we vibe together, how we feel together. Why does that matter? Because if there's a lot of friction in people collaborating and working together, it is highly unlikely that you will have a great culture. And so the onus is now shifting back toward the organization to build great systems, great process, great documentation, so that work amongst people distributed globally has less friction. We're aiming for frictionless work, frictionless global work. Most of that is the responsibility of the organization. Choose great tools, teach people how to use them, give them the freedom and autonomy to use it as best they see it, but create those guardrails. So that's part one. Part two is the more conventional side of culture. I think that this is going to break the frame of some people leaders, but I truly believe that in the future of work, workplace culture will largely be built outside of the workplace. What does this mean? In an office-based world, it was the responsibility of the office to bring people together and to manufacture culture and togetherness. But now we're in a world where people realize that the integration of work and life, that ratio is changing. So instead of seeing that through the lens of fear, trying to force people into video happy hours, see it through the lens of opportunity. What that means is that culture will come from family and community outside of the workplace first. And then the organization is responsible for creating shared opportunities to bring that back to the workplace. It's time to recognize that we're people first and colleagues second, and I think culture will follow that.
It's fascinating. Annie or Laïla, do you want to add anything to that? Oh no, we lost Annie's audio.
No, I was just trying to mute over here to be a good remote citizen. But we wouldn't be having a remote joiner conference without having a "you're on mute" moment. So here we are.
Darren and I have been talking about this a lot, about the idea that, I see a lot of things in the media and the press saying, well, people are disengaged, they're less connected to work. But what we're starting to measure is that people are more connected outside of work. And I think that's a fair trade. I think the idea that people get, their level of engagement at work, perhaps not in their jobs, but in the way that they feel connected to their colleagues or to their companies as a primary source of being connected to community overall, is just one pillar in the future. And so when we see that level of connection settle to a still acceptable but lower baseline, and get more connected to their families, more connected to their local communities, I think that's a really exciting change that is a promise of remote work.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that, Annie? How are you pulling that information back into Atlassian? So those connections, those experiences that people are having in their own world, on the other side of the world in many cases, how are you pulling that back in so that people get to share that together at Atlassian, if at all?
I would say this is new. So we actually have just done some research where we've gone into kind of a wider non-Atlassian landscape to understand how people are connecting outside of their roles, who have access to flexibility and remote work policies. And we are seeing that those people who have access to flexibility, more than half of them are indicating that they are spending more connection time with their local communities and families. But, I still think this is early days. And this is one of those things where, a lot of the conversation in our world is focused on what are we losing from the past model. And I'd love to see more dedicated research efforts focus on what are we gaining in the future model. So we're early innings, but starting to do the research and getting structured in that way.
Awesome. Laïla, did you want to add anything? My next question's for you. So
yeah, I'll just add to Darren's point about the office changing. at Mural, we're talking a lot about the on-site being the new off-site. So there is still a purpose for the office, and right, to bring maybe those external parts of our life at the office. But I just love that kind of mentality of looking at the office as the new off-site place, and where you can have more social gatherings, where you can create more events. At Mural, we only have one office. It's not mandatory at all to go there. It's in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, where the company was founded. And it is a beautiful office. I've been lucky to go there a few times, and they do use it to come together as people. And it's like we're trying to also figure out, because we noticed people were not going to the office that much anymore, how to reuse that office to their benefit, and bringing people together, from your spouses to your partners to your children, coming together there has been great.
I definitely want to spend some time on the in real life experience, because it's an important part. I hear a lot of discussion around this, and we'll definitely get there. Sticking with the virtual world for a second, Laïla, you've done an amazing job advocating for, sharing your playbook for creating virtual experiences that help unite the team. And I think this is really interesting, because this is the other thing, when people saw the title for this panel and they saw the word connection, I think there can be this tendency to go to like the proverbial Zoom happy hour, and we use this as kind of like in a joking way, because it sounds miserable for most of us, but not to naysay the Zoom happy hour completely, but it can be much more than that, and that's not the only way that you can create quote unquote connection on a personal level in the virtual world. So I would love if you could expand on some of the things you've done at Mural, because I think it's pretty groundbreaking.
Yeah, for sure. So I am fed up with Zoom social hours. I'm sure many people here are. I gave a whole talk actually a few months ago about different ways of like micro moments of connecting with people. So you don't need to gather everyone in a Zoom call for an hour, but you can find ways to check in with people. We use Mural, of course. You can check in visually at the beginning of a meeting, like finding these small ways and fun ways of asking people how they are doing without actually saying, how are you? Because even in real life, if I'm like, Chase, how are you? You'll be like, fine. Yeah, but trying to also build that psychological safety and making it easy for people to visually like show how they're doing through a number of ways, checking in. And that's like a ritual that we have. So like building rituals for connection, whether that's an async daily stand-up question that you have, or a visual way that we do. But I wanted to share a few like more original ways of connecting that we've done lately. So we have quite a few employee resource groups. For those people who don't know what that is, it's an ERG. Employee resource groups are ways for people to get together with others who have a shared identity or background. So for example, at Mural, we have an ERG for Black people at Mural. We have ERG for women at Mural, caregivers at Mural, API, so Asian Pacific Islanders. So we have all these different groups, and they're working together on a volunteer basis with our diversity and inclusion program manager. So shout out to Alicia, who's working with them. And what's really cool with these groups is that, for example, Women at Mural, which I'm a part of, they offer a mentorship program, which we just kicked off. So that's a way of connecting with other women and offer mentorship to each other, and they're providing the resources to do that. Sometimes we invite women leaders in our company, maybe executive leaders, to come and do a fireside chat with the women at Mural to share. So it's not just about camaraderie and connecting in a social hour, but finding, for example, how can I actually support you and connect with you in a different way. The Asian Pacific Islanders, they did for the Chinese New Year a dim sum like cooking class online, and at the same time learning about their traditions and Chinese New Year and all that. We have also had like pride events, like virtual drag queen shows that we have invited. So there's different ways that these ERGs have supported connection. We've also done things like a thankathon at Mural with our nonprofit customers, so helping them understand how to use Mural better, and so finding volunteers at Mural who want to connect with our customers in our community, our nonprofit ones, and helping them use Mural differently, but with all Muralistas getting involved. So it's like volunteering online, basically, but it's a really nice way to show gratitude and learn about other ways of using our product. So those are just a few examples. We've also had a Mural homeschool during COVID. So you were mentioning before, like external people in our lives and how do you get that involved. So when COVID started, all our parents were kind of freaking out with their kids at home. and we set up a virtual homeschool for the kids while the schools were figuring out how to plan that whole side of the academic, the curriculum online. So I had to find teachers who could teach activities to young kids online very quickly, and we set up a Mural homeschool for 5 weeks where we would connect the kids of the different parents during COVID to do activities together online while the parents were also connecting with each other. So we have templates and templates now of activities you could do, but this was supporting them and connecting children who were also isolated, right? It wasn't just the parents. The children weren't seeing other children at school anymore. And so it's just really, we're always trying to innovate new ways of how can we connect people. We also did a month called Mayability, which was raising awareness around accessibility and disabilities and mental health at Mural. So it's a month of synchronous and asynchronous activities that we could do, whether it was like a step challenge, having an accountability buddy, or doing training on accessibility for the whole company, and learning about what does it mean to be neurodivergent, what does it mean to have a disability and not being able, what is it for our customers to also use our product with that way. So it's like connecting with different ways of living.
It's an incredible thing because you guys are super intentional about creating that space and giving people real life scenarios to bond around. It's not just throwing them in a Zoom room and saying, have fun for an hour. There's actually something that they're building and contributing to, and it's impacting the company. And I don't think there's any better way to bond than like homeschooling your kids together, it sounds like. Darren or Annie, did you want to add anything to this?
I'll just say that intention goes a long way, and that Thankathon is awesome branding.
I love that. I have one question for you, Laïla. As you think about
we're kind of post-pandemic in a new way this year, even looking back to this time last year when I was stuck in a hotel after a conference for a week with COVID, it feels like that's less part of our day-to-day discourse. How important does the virtual activities and socialization that you've been building continue to be important and a key part of your strategy in the year to come? Do you think this is something that you'll always kind of look to and rely on, or do you feel like the kind of like in-person human connection starts to become a more important part of the story going forward?
Thanks, Annie. That's a good question. We have noticed that engagement has dropped for like the more regular social hours that we were hosting. I think that Zoom fatigue is a real thing, burnout, just like everything, not just at work. Like we had yoga online, everything was online, right? So our strategy this year is much more focused on getting people back in person. The last in-person retreat we had with everyone was with 120 people in Argentina in 2019. Now we're looking at a company of 700 people, so it's clearly more difficult to bring so many people together. So we're looking at smaller regional offsites and department or team offsites. So some of those have kicked off already, and there'll definitely be more of that this year.
How are you all approaching that, Annie? The in-person. I know you mentioned before you're overseeing this. The IRL strategy is what we call it at Doist. How are you guys approaching this?
So we're definitely committed to in-person. I think when we say the phrase intentional togetherness, we're trying to invest in bringing people together in a number of different formats. So whether it's a kind of unofficed community that is coming together in a more event scenario, or a team that's coming together at an office, and I can kind of go into more detail on that. But one of the things that I've been looking at the data recently is the engagement in the virtual events. And we've been thinking about whether we need to really up the ante on our virtual approach. As we've been doing that kind of analysis, it's interesting. We're kind of deprioritizing continued growth on the virtual connection front. We do have a bunch of things that people can always access and be part of. And certainly those things are used and they continue to create value for people, but we're noticing that people's attention is really shifting towards a more in-person focus. That's why I was wondering if it continues to be something that you're really growing, Laïla, or if it's something that's kind of like, okay, you did it, you've got it, and now the engagement kind of is leveling out, is what we're seeing.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, I can say from our standpoint, actually, at Doist, so like for some context, we have 100 people in 35 countries, and we started doing company retreats back in 2015. And we recognized, we went from this very sort of like robotic mindset of we don't need to talk to each other virtually or in person. Let's just be async, get our work done, and go live our lives, to, oh wait, this is kind of cool. We came together, and this brought us closer as a team. The culture, engagement, employee satisfaction, all of these things tangibly better. And so from there, we've started to incrementally invest more in our in-person strategy. And now we do 2 sets of retreats per year, team offsites once a year, and then we do an all hands once a year. And it's become something like, even as we're budget cutting during tough times in other areas, we're reinvesting more in our in-person strategy, and not just in terms of like financial investment, but also investment in terms of like the infrastructure, the documentation, making sure that we're able to plan these and execute these at a really, really high level, but with less input and friction on the front end, because there's a real opportunity cost there when you talk about all the things that go into making it happen, and of course the expense of making them happen. So doing it right is worth investing a lot in upfront.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was even just looking at this yesterday, where, when you look at the business model of remote, there's a lot of opportunity to save money. But then you kind of have to invest those savings into bringing people together. And, because that's the way that people get connected to the company, to friends at the company, their teamwork. And that's how we make sure that information and culture continue to flow. So it's, one of those things that I'm sure will continue to be a conversation over the next couple of years, unlocking that budget for these types of opportunities.
Darren, are you all doing any sort of IRL at Andela?
Yeah, the strategy has been get people together on a smaller scale. There's this concept of a visiting grant where you can partially subsidize travel for each individual and then let ad hoc groups congregate in places that they want. So from an organizational standpoint, this is really powerful because it offloads the burden of responsibility from a centralized unit, being the travel arm of the company. And it enables people to actually plan their own excursions within some guardrails and then use that funding to go see and engage with what matters to them. Mm-hmm. And so what's really powerful about that is you're empowering people to kind of design their own ways to get together. And there's value in not forcing teams, like functional teams, to have to be together. It kind of adds to their cross-functionalness when you enable people to just choose the location or the excursion that they're most interested in.
Yeah, I think the thing that I take from this, and actually it's been such a big topic of conversation just in networking social hours here, the whole idea around the in-person event, how we use offsites and retreats to bolster our company retreat or our company culture, is the thing that stands out to me is that we're all here talking about remote work, but we all see that there's power in bringing us together and using that to enable the way that we work remotely. So it doesn't have to be this remote first means remote only thing. We can have the best of both worlds, but we're all agreeing we don't need to go into an office and be together 50 weeks a year, and it's the other way around. We might need to be together 1 or 2 or 3 weeks a year, and then we get the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
I do want to add something to your point as well, of bringing cross-functional people. So last year we self-organized a retreat in EMEA, in the Netherlands, and it was one of our Muralists this year. We were doing a social hour, and basically we're like, we should all meet, and he suggested to go to his parents' farm because his parents have a big farm with like 15, 20 rooms, and we just really self-organized it very quickly, and it was people across different departments. And some of the managers maybe didn't immediately understand, they understood the importance of coming together, but they maybe thought it had to be more planned according to teams. But we came together anyway, and it was super valuable for people who had never maybe met face-to-face, but suddenly we did skill sharing presentations and understanding what does your team do relating to that team, and then everything kind of came together conceptually almost. It's oh, that's what you guys do. And then there were all these little blockers, maybe micro dynamics that got resolved immediately that normally online would have taken much, much longer. I'm not saying that, we should go back to the office to solve those problems, but I went back to our people ops team and said, this has been a super valuable retreat, or actually it was more like a little informal reunion of 25 people across Europe. They're super motivated now. They now understand what we actually do, because even if we share stuff on Slack async, sometimes just talking to the person makes it so much clearer for you. And one of the questions in our next engagement survey to our employees was, would you rather do an offsite with people in your region or people in your team? And there were very mixed responses. And a lot of people tend to think that if you just meet people in your team or your department, that's much more valuable. But I would argue, seeing what happened in the Netherlands, that bringing people from different departments was much more valuable. And you can still have like people in your department. It's just, it was just like mind opening to see, like, we don't need to think everything in teams and departments, because you're just recreating the silos that are already there online.
Yeah, cycling through that, like both in the virtual world, how we work together every day, having cross-functional teams works really well for bolstering the company culture. I think you get a chance to interact with people from other sides of the company, but it's even more powerful in person, I think. And we're experimenting with that also, actually. We're doing like 2 teams going on their individual offsites to the same place, and they're having their work sessions perhaps separately, perhaps together if it makes sense, but then going out for dinner together at night, and we're getting awesome feedback on that. So I think there's a lot of creativity in this space, which is the cool thing, and we're seeing companies go from just like we saw with a lot of remote work, like, okay, we just got to do this because X, the pandemic made us do it, but now it's like, no, we're going to do these, and we're going to do them at a really high level, and that evolution's really, I think, pretty exciting to see. On this last note on the offsites, Annie, you're very data-driven, which is one of my favorite things about everything that you share while you're building in public. How do we go about justifying the very real costs associated with the in-person events? Obviously, they cost a lot to create themselves, but there's also the cost of pulling everybody out of the office for a week, the work that's not done during that time, the work that goes into planning them, the fractured focus, for example. There's a lot there. So do you, by any chance, have any data, or do you have any way of like tracking how successful and what the positive or negative ROI is?
We are trying. It's not perfect, but I think it builds really on what Laïla was just sharing on different forms of connection. So we have a thesis, and we have buy-in around that thesis that connection is a really important way to solve our biggest problems related to remote work. And again, when I think about the biggest problem of remote versus an office-based culture, not a problem that's not overcomable, but the problem to be solved is flow of information, flow of culture. So connection is something that hits both of those, opportunity areas. And the way that we define connection is, to build on what Laïla said, is connection to company, connection to work friends, and connection to team.
And we have a connection strategy that hits each of those different outcomes. So we do office-based events in order to bring, people into a branded Atlassian space and really feel the values and the culture. And we probably have our least good data on that because it's kind of the most casual. It's something that's programmatic. Every third Thursday we put together,
events. We've been doing something called like meet and mingle lunches, where if you're in the office, we try to have a facilitated way to connect anybody who might be visiting the office but not know a bunch of people there. They can join this lunch and kind of go through a fun set of like silly activities so that they can meet some friends. Then on the connection to work friends front, we have something called Atlassian on Tour. And so this is an idea where we go to any place where we have an organically developed community. So we have a big office in San Francisco, but we also have an organic community that's developed in Denver. So we do event programming, we send senior leaders to that area, we bring that group together, and we watch what happens. So we actually have some really great data based on metrics of who's attending, who's RSVP'd. We have post-event surveys that everybody fills out. So we're looking at a couple of different factors, but in particular, we're looking at how those connections in a community that is not supported by an office stays in touch. And that's really interesting for us. So what we're seeing is that there's 115% greater likelihood that the people who are in that, who were part of that Atlassian on Tour event in Denver are going to stay in touch with each other and maintain their connections and get together at a coffee shop or whatever it might be to do their work together. And then we have connection to team.
And connection to team can mean a lot of different things. I don't know about you all in this room, but one of my emerging theses on this stuff is that the hierarchical team structure matters only so far as the manager is kind of the party host for their direct reports, like making sure that they're connected to the culture, that they are having a good experience, but also that they are productive. And so, when we think about teams, it doesn't have to be that hierarchical team. It could be a cross-functional team. It's people who do work together, and the work that spins up more fluidly. And this is
the big spend bucket. So this is where people are flying from all over the world to come together, just like my colleagues who are in New York right now from Australia. And this is where you sit and get your work done. This is where you plan your strategy for the year. And the data that we're looking at on this is really interesting. So we found that on a quarterly basis, more than 40% of the company is participating in a team-based event.
And we collect post-event surveys on these team-based events. And we're looking at ease of planning.
We're looking at ability to connect or your satisfaction with the level of connection that you experience. So, what is that connection metric? And we're also just looking at satisfaction. And our KR, or our key result for this high spend team-based event, is that we keep all of those metrics over 90%.
And we have seen that we have kept it over 90%, but it's also a sugar high. Like if you get to fly from Australia to New York and have great dinners with your team, are you not going to say that you're more connected or that you're not having a good experience?
So I would say it's a really consistently great experience. And we're just getting to the point where we can start to say, how does an org network look? If you attended a team-based gathering, do you have a richer
office community? And that's, I think, the next kind of step of data that helps us advocate for big budgets long-term to continue to pursue these events. But what we're seeing so far is that they're extraordinarily well-liked and extraordinarily highly used, and people just love them.
A common red thread, all of our organizations are we're highly invested in a remote strategy and a virtual first strategy, and at the same time, we're also all investing more in bringing people together on an occasional basis. I think that's very interesting, and then there's the data to back it up. So thank you. We want to get to questions. I think we have quite a few. So I want to ask one more question of all of you. Darren, we'll start with you and work our way towards Annie. I kind of started off the discussion here saying that the detractors of remote work are very quick to jump on culture and cohesiveness, claiming that you can't have those things if you don't have an office. So I would love to know, what would be your advice if you had the opportunity to talk to one of those CEOs that we see in the headline that are demanding a return to office based on the lack of culture and connectiveness? What advice would you give to them, or what would you want to say to them to perhaps change their mind?
I would say that culture and how we define it is changing. And if you don't know what that is in your company, I would challenge you to document it, to write it down, because writing forces clarity. And I would also say, make sure that you account for how work happens as a lever for culture.
Awesome. Laïla?
I would add to that to really go and speak to the people at your company and listen to them and pay attention and then act accordingly to what they desire and what their needs are. We always start with, people's needs if we want to be a people-centric company. So listening to them, and then not just listening for the sake of listening, but actually taking action. And as leaders, sponsor these initiatives.
Did we lose Annie?
I'm still here, I think,
okay.
But you can't see me anymore. Okay, here.
There we go, you're back.
I would say that every company is distributed. unless you are
working, in your 10 people who worked in an office every single day, you can still rely on that old model. Every single company is distributed. So it requires us all to figure out how to embrace modern work. Connection is a huge part of that, and it requires us to think differently. So again, it's all about looking forward instead of comparing what we have today to the past. That's not going to give us anything better than a faster horse instead of the Model T.
Hey
That's
Chase, can
great.
I break the fourth wall real quick?
Yeah.
Tyler, could you snap a photo of this so we can share it back with Amy? Because it looks pretty awesome. We miss you here, Amy.
I know, I'm sitting here being like, should I take a selfie for my camera?
Yeah, you should. I mean, we're
Please
talking
do.
about culture and connection.
Everybody wave at Annie. This was fantastic. Thank you. I believe we have more questions than we'll have time to get to, but let's give it a shot. I can see it up on the screen, I think, better.
Yeah, you can call it from there. Perfect.
Yeah, here we go. So great ideas on fostering connection and culture in our distributed teams. I was wondering if you made use of surveys to ask your employees what was top of mind for them on this topic. Laïla, this kind of goes to what you were just saying about starting by asking, which seems logical.
Yeah, I feel like that's the starting point. Send a survey, ask people questions, get the feedback, create a strategy, and if you don't understand, also try to speak, to smaller groups of people and get more data on that.
I would also say, like, don't overcomplicate it. Like, you can start with a V1 of this,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And just like
Google form is like
yeah. You don't have to like go rocket scientist on this whole thing. Like building culture doesn't have to be so challenging. And I think people might overcomplicate it simply because we're distributed now, and that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. I don't know if Darren or Annie want to add anything to that.
My answer is yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Send the survey. What question would you ask? Like, what would you ask specifically about? What activities do people want? Would you ask like, what time zone? Like, what would you focus on?
This is one of those rare instances where trying to force it into a 1 to 10 might not serve you well until you're calibrated. So I think open form questions, giving people the space to actually articulate what excellence looks like to them. I know that's going to take more time to digest the first time, but if you've never done this before, giving them that forum is really important to calibrate.
Yeah.
I'd also like to add that writing questions around your company values and how well your event, for example, has responded to that value or aligned with that value. So when we had our reunion, we asked, how well did we play to wow during this event? And it wasn't like a 1 to 10, but there were comments as well. So if you do it also with your values, I find that it's quite valuable to see, did we play to wow when we were in the Netherlands? Did we think global when we were in the Netherlands? And like how?
Connecting the strategy back to the values is such a key point. So thanks for bringing that
Yeah.
up. I would say throughout work, that's important. But even with these connection moments, they should be values aligned.
Absolutely. Let's see, we've got another one here. I know that Chase has been looking closely at creating inclusive in-person connection moments for Doist regional retreats in terms of balance of extrovert-introvert activities. Question for panelists. How are you creating inclusive experiences when fostering connection in distributed teams? Inclusivity is something I'm sure all four of us agree is something you have to be extra deliberate about in a remote setting. Certainly when you're creating the few days per year that you're going to bring people together. If you're co-located and you miss the company happy hour or the luncheon, okay, no problem. You'll join the one next week. But in a distributed setting where we're doing this very rarely, inclusivity is key, and you have to get out in front of it. So what are you all doing in this regard?
I'll give you one, and then we'll see if we can get Annie back up there if she has anything to add. So we've talked a lot about spending a lot of money to make great remote experiences, but here's a boring solution that costs nothing. Here's a very low-lift alternative to the Zoom happy hour, and I call it the community impact outing. So if you have a cadence on Zoom happy hours, think of this as a sunk cost. You're going to get everyone together for an hour on a Friday. Instead of doing that, deploy all of your people out into their local communities for that same hour. But it could be any hour that works for them during the week. And the advice is simple. Advise them to go do something that's meaningful and fulfilling to them. And if you want bonus points, wear company swag and take a selfie while you're doing it. and you've just created a marketing campaign. And you've also given people something to share back, whether it's a shared Slack channel on community impact outing. And so for me, I'm an adoptive dad. It's a very important part of my identity stack at Tip the Tower Cellhorn. So with that hour of the week, I may go invest that hour in some way through adoption or orphan care. If I take a selfie of myself there and I share that back with my team, I may get other people on the team that are in some way connected to the adoption community that now know, so am I. That creates genuine, authentic connection that I think you would be hard-pressed to manufacture that in the office. This costs nothing. You are already investing the hour on the Zoom happy hour. Just give people permission to go out there, create the psychological safety and the medium to share back.
Huge fan of that initiative, by the way. I'm going to jump to the next question because, like I said, we have a lot. So let's do just one answer for each question. Cool. Somebody just raise their hand if it calls to you. Do you think a remote company can build a great culture and connection without ever meeting IRL in person? Annie's hands up.
Can I take this one? Because I was going to be like, can we answer this one? I think this is so interesting of a question, so thank you for asking it.
I'm not sure that you can unless you're a company that's under, 8 or so people. I think that you can build great relationships virtually. When I built my startup, I didn't meet my co-founder for over a year, and we had a great relationship. But I think that you really need to invest in the in-person
moments, and you can carry that investment forward for some period of time based on the size of the group. Like yesterday, I was saying that I have a team of about 40 people globally that are all related to workplace experience, and I met them all in Austin last year. I think that I can probably go 24 months and carry those relationships forward without them kind of degrading, because these aren't people that I see every day. But I'm not sure that you can, especially at scale, really swing relationships on a larger basis without coming into these communal spaces in person. And I know we said that we should only have one response per question, but I'm really curious if that's a controversial stance, or if you guys think that you can build a zero in-person remote company.
It was more of a guideline than a rule. We can make it.
I think we'll just say Annie is right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Annie.
I do too. Yeah, I actually completely agree. I think I can reflect back on our experience at Doist when we jumped from that robotic state that I mentioned at one point to where we had that first IRL gathering and the transition, and we were about 40 people at that time. And it was that inflection point. At 10, 12, 15 people, I think it was okay. But scaling beyond that, you need that time together. And I think especially for new hires, it becomes increasingly important because it's really, it can be really challenging no matter how much intentionality you put behind it to get those new hires into feeling like a real part of the culture until they've had that time. Not for everyone, but I found that to be the case often enough. What do you say to leaders who simply prefer in-person connection?
Oh, and prefer in-person connection?
Yeah, they just always want in-person. They're like, sorry, we're doing in-person.
Remote workers prefer in-person connection too.
Yeah.
That's why we're all here in this room. It's not a zero-sum game. Invest in person.
Simple enough. Katie, I hope that was good enough for you. Very rich discussion. Thank you, Courtney. As you plan for next trends on distributed work teams, what is your greatest concern? Who has fears?
As you plan for?
As you plan for the next trends in the distributed teams, what are your greatest concerns?
Hybrid.
Why?
Out of the modes of working, I'd say it's the most complex. So if we're all on the same page, like we're all in the office, or if we're all fully remote, we're all following the same guidelines, but hybrid is mixing those, and so it's, for me, and I think for many, the most complex way of working, but I'm also very excited to see how we're going to figure it out. I don't have the answers. I don't think anybody has all the answers for how to do that type of working and how to connect in a hybrid way, so that's what I'm looking forward to.
The person probably closest to that is on screen here that can attest to some of this. Does this keep you up at night, Annie?
I think that what I'm most excited about, and also is a source of concern, I guess, is that I really want to see the conversation get elevated. And so I'm focused on two things. One, I want everyone to understand that using location diversity, meaning that are allowing people to live in many different places, is a more efficient business model because it gives you leverage on your offices, it gives you leverage on your, cost of in the cost that it takes to carry employees. It just is a great business model to be invested in. And the other thing that I want everyone to understand is that even if you don't do location diversity, everybody is embracing distributed in some format. And so you have to embrace modern work. And that means that you need to figure out how to connect. You need to figure out how to get people onboarded. You need to embrace document-led collaboration. And these are the things that I would love us to start talking about, like how to do and win at those things so that everyone can see that this is not a fringe issue. It's not for just fully remote companies. This is just the way of the future. And then we can stop having conversations about what CEOs are letting, what people back in the office and on what days, because this is a much more profound change. And I'd like to see that change be protected and permanent.
Fantastic answer. I love this next question. I think it's very real and something that largely we're yet to solve, and it's an emerging challenge. So to kind of paraphrase it, basically, can we speak to how professional development and mentoring exists in remote cultures? There's a lot of information out there about Gen Z actually preferring the office. Millennials are shouting, "What? We pushed for remote, and now you want to go back to the office?" So what is and a lot of that is centered around a lack of mentorship. They're not learning through osmosis by being in the office. They don't feel like they're getting the face time that they need to further their careers. So any thoughts on how to approach this and what you're seeing? Maybe you're experiencing the opposite.
I'll share two quick thoughts. One, we've yet to build the infrastructure for great remote mentoring.
Yeah.
You got to remember that we have hundreds of years of building great in-person infrastructure for mentoring. So it shouldn't be a surprise that it doesn't work as well. We've yet to build the infrastructure, so we'll get there. The second part is remote mentoring. Mentor Cruise is a great example of that. This enables people to have mentors across oceans, time zones, cultures that you could not have. So this goes back to looking at it through the lens of opportunity over fear. If you're intentional about it, then you can actually enable more connection through mentorship programs. But the infrastructure is still being built.
Agreed. Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Something we've done is we started incorporating onboarding trips. So like new hires go to meet their mentor. Everybody's assigned a mentor, and you go meet with that mentor for a week within your first 6 months, usually pretty soon right after you're hired. And that's been a big game changer for us.
All right, I'll take it back. Chase is building the infrastructure. So everybody see Chase after this panel.
I wanted to add just with regards to training, when it comes to managers receiving so much training, and on top of that also, like how do you learn how to become a manager, like a new manager, and then how do you become a new manager in a remote environment? Because a lot of the manager training out there is not for the remote environment. And so what we've realized at Mural also is they have a lot of responsibilities. We've been going through hypergrowth, and on top of that, we were layering so much training that they were not having enough time to take it in. There's a lot of overwhelm, and so we've had to kind of step back from hey, you guys need to be on top of everything and also do your work and also manage a team and also reach your OKRs. And so we've kind of we were talking about that yesterday in Sasha Connor's discussion in the deep dive stage around how to just balance that experience especially for new junior managers in a new environment. There is a lot to take in, and we kind of need to take a step back. Absolutely.
We've got time for one last question, and I'm just going to do a little random pick here because there's a lot. Let's see here. I'm gonna go away from retreats. We spent enough time there, I think. Okay, this is really interesting. Quick answer from any of you that this resonates with. What is your vision for how remote work can be leveraged as a tool for rejuvenating local communities, to connect people beyond their own teams and even companies, to facilitate human connection and form communities that can be positively impact social and economic opportunities.
I love that.
Yeah.
Who is this person?
Yeah.
Raise your hand.
Thank
Please
you, Gary.
find all of us after
Thank you,
this.
Gary. I think this is something like this touches on. We all talked about this a little bit. I think like bringing your local community back into the office with you and sharing that in some way, but having that impact locally is where that starts. And I think there's a myth that remote workers sit in their bedrooms alone and miserable and have no social life. But what I found is that we do tend to fill that void with something else. We make social connections. We have that extra time and space, and we fill it with other social connections, other hobbies, philanthropic or otherwise. So I don't know if anybody would like to share anything related to that question.
I just had a very short experience in the past 2 weeks in southern Italy with people organizing pop-up. Actually, they're here also, maybe Kino Italy. They organize these pop-up experiences for 1 month in Italy to reach have remote workers in local communities working together, but also learning the local culture. And so this was an incredible experience. I know Gonzalo is also doing that, Gonzalo Hall in Madeira. And it's really about bringing remote workers together, creating that community, getting to know the local culture. And I think especially if you're like a digital nomad, you really crave for that, but you also want to have like social impact and not just travel for travel's sake. So I am all in. If anybody is doing that, get in touch.
I will plug a few organizations real quick. Boundless Life for families that are wanting to experience that, and another organization called Pueblos Remotos in the Canary Islands that's doing similar philanthropic work in remote settings for remote workers. I think we're out of time, unfortunately. I wish we could get to all these. Thank you all so much. This was fantastic. Round of applause for our panelists.